Alright, we're back here at the 10B. Before I forget a couple more things, we were missing one window when we got the machine, this lower one. So I got some angle, cut a frame, had it welded together, had a piece of safety glass put in, and then when I was installing it, I had to raise the top window up to get the bottom window in place. Top window fell, punched a hole right in the middle of it. That was a $125 piece of glass, so that window there cost me $250. It is square. Unfortunately, the metal piece below where the window sits is not square, and there's a bit of a gap on the one side. Also, I forgot to mention, when I was using the drag line when I first got the machine, the drag cable was too short. You'd go to cast the bucket out, and when it would hit the end of the cable, it would typically just pull the cable right off of the drum, and then you'd be reattaching. So onto the shovel front, I could do a whole video on refurbishing this shovel front. There were so many things involved. First, of course, removing the backhoe boom and attaching the shovel boom, and that wasn't really too difficult. It's just held on by a couple of big pins here at the bottom. There's some pictures on Instagram. We used a John Deere 4020 with a loader on it to get the shovel front in place. On this one, the dipper was not on it. The dipper was actually mounted on the 37 because the 37 dipper was worn really bad and it was just sitting to the side. So I had to do a dipper swap, and getting it off the 37 mainly involved loosening this big nut right here. And I didn't have a wrench big enough for that, but amazingly, tapping on the edge of it with a hammer right here, I was able to loosen it. I was able to get it off. I was able to get the dipper swapped out. And then once that process was taken care of, then I can start putting the cables on. Next is the crowd chains. I'll climb up here. You'll get a good look at the two crowd chains. This is what allows the stick to crowd out or retract. And we have two chains that take care of that, and you could see the chain in the back is a lot smaller. I had that chain. Couldn't believe it was all there. It was completely froze up. I cleaned it, soaked it in a pan of oil, and it's still not too bad a shape. Unfortunately, the front chain here was missing altogether. I had a couple of links, and I was able to go to Grainger and buy 10 foot of chain. You need just a little bit less than that. And here's some of the old links here in a drawer, and here's a little bit of the extra chain that I had to cut. That was a $500 chain that I had to have. I also had to buy a dipper trip cable. So the small cable that runs here, that goes to pull the trip mechanism, runs up. There's a shiv up there. Of course, that was frozen. Top shivs were frozen up. Took care of those. These shivs here were missing. So again, at Grainger, I managed to buy a couple of small shivs for that, and I got myself a new dipper trip cable. And then at one point in time, minutes after I fired up the machine, here's the dipper trip cable and the clutch. This clutch was also frozen up, so I had to take that apart. But it threw the cable at one point, it got wrapped around a shaft, and there's my new dipper trip cable. So I found one at the farm, a slightly smaller size, able to install it, able to use it, and of course I haven't messed that one up. But yeah, the pulling force on these machines through these drums is pretty incredible, because I was able to just pull this this brand new cable right into two pieces. We're getting towards the end here, and we're getting towards the most difficult project I've done on any of my machines, and the one that almost brought it all to an end because it was so frustrating. Got the two crowd chains here, one to the front drum and one to the back drum. The drums spin in opposite directions, so one of those allows the bucket to crowd out, one of those allows the bucket to retract. And back here, we're looking at the Retrack Clutch, and this clutch, couldn't tell you how many years it had been since this thing had the shovel on it, and this clutch was frozen, so it was stuck in the retrack position. When you fired up the machine via this chain, the front drum was spinning backwards, and that's all there was to it. And this was the single worst project I have probably ever done on a machine in my life. There's very little room to work in here. You only got a few inches here. I'm saying about 4 to 5 inches here max to work. And you got the two clutch bands inside of that drum. It works just like a drum brake, both frozen up. Took me about a total of 8 hours with a little piece of stainless steel and a small hammer of tapping that piece of stainless steel in along the edge of this clutch band between the drum itself, the clutch, drum, and the clutch band, and working it all the way around and having to spin, this shaft, this drum by hand every time I needed to do so. I spent 3 days, 3 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours, and it was just a god-awful process. Extremely uncomfortable, very little room to work, and that was the one that almost did me in. While I was back here, I took everything apart and I cleaned things up back here. The clutches, the mechanisms had a lot of debris, a lot of grease, a lot of dirt in them, and I cleaned all that up. And I did get it working, but again, I don't know that I would ever be willing to tackle anything that was that difficult, that time consuming. So now we got all the main functions on the shovel working, and then it came down to the dipper trip, our last little item here. And it's a little bit complex, the mechanism here. The clutch in there keeps this cable under tension. But you can't have too much tension, because then if you crowd the bucket out, if there's too much tension on this cable, it'll trip the dipper. So you got to get the clutch set just right. And of course it pulls up on this, and through the mechanism here it eventually comes down and it pulls on this green bar here, pulls up on this, and it releases the pin. Well, there were 2 springs on here and they weren't properly attached. And of course the mechanism was dirty. There's these 2 separate pieces here. There was a lot of wear down in here, and there was also a chain, and the manual shows a chain that attaches from this hook down to here. And the problem I was having was that with just the chain on there, nothing to hold the latch in the latched position, as you would move the dipper, raise it up and extend it out to where you wanted to dump, this latch was very loose. It would move up and down, and if you weren't super careful, it'd trip the dipper on it, and you'd end up dumping when you didn't want it to dump. And at other times, depending on the clutch adjustment, and this wasn't returning properly either, sometimes you couldn't get it to dump. You'd be pushing on a lever, and we weren't getting the movement that we wanted out of it. So we fabricated this on our own. Again, the manual shows a chain here. So we cut a bar, and then we put a spring on here to hold it down. This way, there's a solid piece pushing down on it. There's a bar pulling down on it, and we're able to get the rest of the mechanism working well enough, including building this up in here to get rid of some slack in the system, that it does seem to be working now. This piece here was broke, and I had somebody fabricate a new piece for me there, and I had this new piece fabricated, and the end of the dipper pin there, the latch, had to have that built up a little bit. So a lot of things to get this shovel front working, and I've played with it a little bit, and it's a lot of fun to play with. A little bit more skill involved in running it than what you would think. Most of the videos that I see guys running these machines, they got a nice big soft pile of sand, and you see them and it looks like they're just pushing the levers forward and the machine's just biting in, and it's all great. But I have a clay pile that's about as hard as concrete, and it's not quite as easy as just jamming the levers forward and letting this thing dig, because if you try to crowd this out too hard, like say in the position it's in right now, it won't push itself into the ground. So what does it do? it pushes against the boom and it'll raise the boom up in the air, and then as soon as you let off the lever, the boom will come slamming down. So you got to get a feel for it, and at some point maybe I'll get some videos of the shovel operating, but as of right now I'm a terrible shovel operator and I really don't want to showcase my lack of skills. So overall, guys, those are some of the things you could be in for with a machine like this, and there's a lot more. There's a lot of other things that could potentially be wrong. My valve cover gasket, as long as I could find one, not a big deal. The main gear case that isn't inside of here, right down there, you can see the covers for it. There's two shafts that come out of the bottom of that. There's one for swinging the machine, there's one for propelling the machine, and the seal on the propel shaft is I don't know if it's even there, but it's so bad that that gear case won't hold oil, so I'm constantly dumping oil in there, and then you know, depending on if I'm operating the machine or the position it's sitting in, I'm losing the oil. I believe replacing that would be extremely difficult. I don't know if I would have to drop the drive axle, and there's a sprocket on the end of the drive axle, or if I would have to possibly take these hook rollers off and support the upper works of the machine on some cribbing and remove the lower works out from underneath it. I don't know if that's something that I'll ever be able to do, mainly since I don't have a shop. So that and a lot of other things that maybe I've forgotten, guys. Some of the stuff you'd be up against, you want to own a cable excavator, lots of work, general maintenance. You know, I painted it a few years ago. You saw it, it looked like brand new. It's been 7 years since it's been painted. Needs another paint job, constantly lubing it, oiling the cables, a lot of other things. But a lot of fun, a cool toy. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and hopefully we'll have something in the future we'll be able to see this machine operate a little bit. Thanks for watching.